Okay, thank you very much, and um, welcome all to the session on universal acceptance implementation um, at the second ICANN APAC TWNIC Engagement Forum. In the session today, we aim to introduce to you what is universal acceptance, and then we have a panel of experts here who will be talking about different aspects around the implementation. We will have Dennis Tanaka, who chairs the Environment Working Group of Universal Acceptance Steering Group, which is a community-led initiative on universal acceptance. And he'll be presenting what are the current challenges in technology as far as universal acceptance is concerned. Then Champika, who is with ICANN, he's going to be sharing with you how to configure, for example, email servers, what are the current gaps and how to configure them properly so that we can support email address internationalization. And then finally, Dr. Data, who is the chair of Universal Acceptance Steering Group, he will share the significance of and relevance of universal acceptance implementation globally, and we'll take questions and answers at the end. However, please feel free to raise any questions if you have during the presentation as well. Um, so let's move on. So basically, universal acceptance means that all domain names and email addresses should work correctly in all software applications. And they what is meant by usage of these correctly is that both domain names, all kinds of domain names, and all kinds of email addresses should be accepted, validated, processed, stored, and displayed by all applications properly. And this is actually a necessary prerequisite to provide choice to end users, provide them access, and allow for innovation in the domain name space. So I guess the question, of course, is that what do we mean when we talk about all domain names and email addresses? And what we've shown here is some examples of what is now possible as far as domain names and email addresses are concerned. So we all know we started the DNS started with a few GTLDs like .com, .net, .org. Um, Most of these were three letters in the generic top-level domain space, and then we also had the country codes, which were two letters. Um, but since then, we now actually have many more top-level domains, and they can form or very different uh, categories of domain names. Some examples include some of the new top-level domain names, which are still three characters long, include an example here is .sky. Um, Also, we can have now much longer domain names like .engineering, and we can also have top-level domains as well as domain names in local languages. And here we've given an example in Thai language, but you can actually have domain names in any of the languages and scripts which are used globally. So, also, because of this, domain names now being possible in local languages, email address standards have also been updated to include allow emails also in local languages. So in addition to the ASCII email addresses, um, it is now possible to have either the domain name part, which is on the right-hand side of the @ sign, in local language, or also the left-hand side, which is the mailbox name or the local part in local language as well. So you can possibly have complete email addresses in a local language, and that's what email address internationalization refers to. And as I shared earlier, all applications there are many applications which do not accept all these categories of applications, sorry, domain names and email addresses. So moving forward, universal acceptance attempts to ensure that these applications are updated and the newer ones, when being developed, are able to address all these different categories of domain names and email addresses. So, what are the current challenges? And for that, I will invite Dennis to share with us some of the work which is currently being done by Universal Acceptance Steering Group on what are the current technology gaps. So, over to you, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarman. Hello, everyone. I hope you are hearing me okay.
Yes.
Okay, so next slide. So you just saw a sneak peek of what is possible in terms of domain names, right? With the programs that I can run and expanding the namespace into other new UTLDs and in different forms in ASCII and IDN. What we want in the UASG and in the overall communities, how does application really are using these new domain names, these new identifiers? And so what we do at UASG is to measure this acceptance, if you will, level of acceptance, and in different categories. So we look at doing gap analysis and assess the level of acceptance, processing, display, storage, and validation of these identifiers in the different applications, from programming libraries to all the way to end user applications such as browsers, social media platforms, and you name it, right? And so what we are going to see, and I'm going to review in the next slide, just a example of what the UAG has done in the past years. So next slide, please. So first, we'll start with the programming languages and frameworks. And this is a summary of what we found in a study done a few years back in what we call the study UASG 018A. And what we did here was to look at the programming languages used out there and assess whether they are UA ready or whether there are certain deficiencies in terms. So let's take, for example, the first one that we have on the first row is looking at the library libcurl for the C language, and do the type of test that was done here was the email syntax. So as you saw in the previous slide that Sarma showed, now we have the email addresses that can use a range of letters either at the left or right side of the @ sign, right? So basically Unicode. But also there needs to be some kind of acceptance at the protocol level in terms to accepting internationalized letters or characters on both sides, and that's called the email address internationalization protocol. That's an IETF RFC protocol. And so in this example, the libcurl, what we found is that it is ready, but it needs to be careful. And in this example, for example, the libcurl will announce that it supports SMTP UTF-8 protocol. That means that it accepts the email address internationalization protocol, but in real tests with email addresses, it will accept a range of email addresses, even though the syntax is not correct. So that kind of goes to that we hope that this information provides programming software developers with the information as they select which programming languages and libraries they want to use, right? The ideal scenario is that they use all that are green because they are fully UL ready. The other light red, they need to be careful as to what they're going to do with those. And the red ones are the ones that didn't pass any of those tests. So next slide, please. And this is the continuity list of the programming languages were tested. So again, so the type of test that were done is to look at whether they can validate the domain name syntax, ASCII or IDM. They can do the conversion from ASCII to Unicode and vice versa, and look at also the email syntax and acceptance of the protocols there. So next slide, please. So now moving on to higher up the stack, if you will. So first we look at the programming languages and libraries in isolation, in a vacuum. And then the next step for us was to, okay, so we know what programming languages and libraries are out there. So let's see how they are used. And so the next step for us was to look at, for example, the open source repository GitHub, and look at all the applications using Java and see what is being used there in terms of validation for identifiers, again, domain names and email addresses. And what we found here, not every single application in the GitHub repository uses or needs a domain name or email address validation procedure, but those that we found, it was surprising to see that they were using tools or validation procedures that are not what we could consider UL ready, because they rely on regular expressions or static lists of TLDs in terms of when validating a domain name or email addresses. And for two reasons, right? For those who know how to handle regular expression, I mean, you can put so much in a regular expression, and that really will not be practical in terms of validating a range of identifiers that you see using Unicode code points or letters, if you will. And as far as using a static list of TLDs, because of the root zone evolves and changes almost every day, then relying on a static list of TLDs, it just does not, it's not practical, not realistic, because you will miss certain extensions that are created or going in and out from the root zone on a daily basis, basically. And so this is what the reality on Java. So that's something that we look at it, we know there's an opportunity here to fix or mitigate, remediate, reach out to those libraries or the GitHub and try to reverse that course, right? And that's what the UASG next step is going to consider doing. So let's go to the next slide. We also look at, in the same GitHub repository, we look at the applications using Python. This was a different story, a better story, in which most of the libraries used are compatible, are using the right set of libraries in terms to validating internationalized domain names. And within the international domain names validations, you of course can validate any type of domain name. So this is a different story, a better story using Python. Next slide. And now shifting a little bit into other type of applications. For example, content management system. We recently did a study on WordPress, the most common content management system used out there. So we wanted to test and assess our assumptions, whether they can really use domain names and email addresses in all its shapes and forms. And what we did was to test first the basic platform, the CMS, and that's what you see in the first line, first row in the table here. And also we wanted to look at extensions, right? Because most likely when somebody is setting up a website, they want to put more functionality as far as managing a membership list or creating and managing events and a calendar, for example. And all of those, typically you will use an email address in order to manage your membership members. And so we look at these different examples of extensions available for the WordPress and look at whether they were able to manage or use email addresses. And what we found was different levels of acceptance. And so the B level means that there is not an ideal level of acceptance, but it's acceptable in some terms. Those are the C level did not pass the test. And so if we move on to the next slide, we can see in more detail what type of tests passed and did not pass. And the vast majority of the failures came from internationalized email addresses, as I think it was expected. At least in these examples of extensions that were chosen in order to select. The acceptance levels are higher, you would expect in the ASCII when there's a fully ASCII email addresses and in some kind on the IDNs, as you can see on rows. So the first row on your left, the ASCII at ASCII.ASCII, that's a fully ASCII email addresses. If you move four columns down to your right, you have the ASCII at RTL stands for right to left, and those are the right to left scripts such as Hebrew or Arabic, and there's some kind of acceptance there. When we mix and add Unicode at the left side of the @ sign, which is the user ID, that's where the problems start. So this is just a homework for the USG to look at more deeply into these issues and see whether the USG can provide any type of fixed mitigation strategies in order to reverse this course, or find a different type of extension that the USG can recommend using. Next slide. And now shifting at looking at a study done on websites and the level of acceptance of email addresses. For example, when you find a contact form or something in order you input your email address in a website, we look at the top 1,000 domain names and top 1,000 websites, and we look far back as 2017, and we have repeated this study to see whether there's a evolution or trend on acceptance on websites. And so the good news here is that every year there is a marginal increase in acceptance in all types of domain names. We had a little setback in the ASCII at Chinese.ASCII email addresses, but that might be just an anomaly of the study or perhaps a real acceptance level. So we will see when we do this again next year. But again, the overall story is that the levels of acceptance are increasing year over year. Thank you. Next slide. And next, shifting more to the email app ecosystem. So we look at the email stack, the email ecosystem in all its components, right? From the user agent to the transport agents and anything in between. And so next slide, please. So what we do here is that we do the analysis and we basically test two different things, two big categories here. So, and that's what we refer as L1 and L2. So when we're testing a L1, and that basically means that the user agent or the system can send and receive an email address using email address internationalization. So fully internationalized email address. That's what a L1 would mean. And L2 means that the system can provision these email addresses. Provision meaning creating the identifiers themselves, right? And so looking at all these components and looking at all the applications out there, there are different levels of acceptance. So when we see here is that not every component does everything, right? And so you need a whole suite of components in order to fill your system. And there are going to be different levels of acceptance in each of these components. So you can find more information here. The link is not available here, but I think we were happy to provide the links to the more detailed analysis and report of this analysis. Next slide, please. Next, we also look at staying on the email applications. We look at the globally, or what's the level of readiness in terms of servers there. So we informally did a survey of MX records in the GTL. I'm sorry, not GTLD. I think all the TLDs available in the zones. And look at the MX records and look and see whether they accepted SMTP UTF-8. And so what basically was found is that less than 10% of these domain names that had an MX record were able to accept the SMTP UTF-8 protocol in the handshake when the server sits. And again, more information you can find in the study UASG 021D there. And last but not least, just wanted to leave you with this remediation cycle diagram here that we do at UASG. So again, right, you cannot fix what you cannot measure. So that's what we do at UASG. We measure, we do gap analysis in order to assess the successes or deficiencies that we find in the applications out there. And when we get those reports back and what are the analysis, we see what we can use in order to, if we find successes, we find systems that are fully UA ready, we want to amplify their usage, their adoptions. And so we will arm our ambassadors and trainers in order to recommend those type of implementations. When we find gaps or deficiencies in the technology, we want to find strategies and brainstorm within our working groups in order, okay, so can we fix this? How can we get the applications, the libraries, closer to your readiness, whether it's to provide code or solutions to those, for example, in the open source to provide code or some recommendations to the maintainers of those software repositories or something different. And we start all over again the cycle, right? We start looking at other technologies, other software, or we expand in the same stack. For example, the UA measurement working group will, as I think they have in their plans to expand the look at the gap analysis into the other content management system as Joomla, Drupal, etc. You name it. And so I think that was my last slide, Sarmat. And I think we're leaving questions for the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. We'll move on to the second presentation. This is by Champika Vijayatunga from ICANN. He's going to be talking about how to set up email servers to support internationalized email addresses or email addresses in your local languages. So, Champika, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Samad. And I hope that you can hear me. And so, as Samad mentioned, in this part of the presentation, I will be going through basically in terms of supporting the email address internationalization. Now, you can see that, simply we call this as EAI. So whenever you hear this term or you see this term in the future slides, EAI means we are referring to email address internationalization. Okay, next slide, please, Samad. Okay, now let us try to understand actually what is EAI and what is not really EAI. Because here we are talking, obviously we've been using email for a very, very long time. And generally, we use ASCII or, English type of email IDs. Probably in maybe in Taiwan, you probably still use maybe the Chinese characters, but it would be good to kind of, still understand what sort of things that, especially if you're a mail server operator, what are the things that you should be considering in terms of supporting the local language scripts. So what is EAI? As in the previous slides also we discussed in the earlier presentation, it is important to consider or have some understanding on UTF-8. In other way, basically the Unicode format. The whole idea here is that, ASCII is quite limited. We've been using ASCII for a long time. And it is quite limited. We can't have all the local language scripts represented by ASCII. This is where we have to go for Unicode. And so UTF-8 is the standard. Now, when you think of UTF-8, there are different schemes as well. There is UTF-8, there is UTF-16, there is UTF-32, and so on. But we use UTF-8 here because it is the sort of most optimized scheme in terms of several aspects, things like the storage, the transmission, and so on. So UTF-8 is the format that we are considering here. So if you look at an email ID, we know that there are two parts in it. One is the part before that sign, and the other part is the domain basically that comes after the @sign. So we have these two parts. So when the one which is left in, say, in an English email ID, the part which is left to the @sign or before that sign is what we simply refer to as the mailbox, basically. That is our mailbox name. And the right side to the @sign is actually domain. So I would be kind of very specific here in for example, Latin based or English type of email ID. But obviously there are some local language scripts, like for example, Arabic, where you write the email IDs from right to left as well, not just from left to right. So that's so when you have say UTF-8 support in your mailbox, as we have shown here, or when you have a domain name in UTF-8, we will put that into the EAI category. So what is not an EAI actually? So this is when we consider that beyond that part, which means, say, for example, if you find UTF-8 or local language characters, say, in your subject line in the email, or if you have, some, because in the ID, email ID fields, we have address comments. So if you find some UTF-8 strings in the address comments, or if you consider even in the email body itself, right? That is actually not considered as EAI. I mean, that doesn't really fall into EAI or this context of email address internationalization, because those things can be supported by other conventional email things, because there are mechanisms to support those. Say, for example, if you have UTF-8 based scripts in your email body, say Chinese scripts in the email body, that can be handled by, say, for example, like, MIME provides that possibility of handling that email. These are, and, this is what I'm trying to highlight here. And these things do not fall into the category of EAI, so non-EAI. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we have understood the difference between EAI and not really what is non-EAI. What sort of levels do we have in terms of implementation? Now, earlier when Dennis was going through his presentation slides, there was, if you remember, there was a chart where, he had different tools, email, software tools, and their respective support for, different components of the email system. Because in a typically in an email system, you have different components as well. Now, so this is where we are trying to coming from. So we define, different type of levels when you think of EAI support. Now, first of all, if there is no EAI support, so which means if only the ASCII emails can be supported by those tools and services, then we say, okay, there is no EAI support there, right? But when it comes to level 1, simply, that means we can send an email. So the receiver sender can send an email, and the receiver can receive the email. So if this possibility is there, we say that, okay, you'll have level 1 support, right? But in level 1 support, we are unable to create mailboxes. So if you want an internationalized email ID, say if you want an email ID in Chinese, and if you go to a certain tool or certain provider, and if you are unable to create an email ID, or if you're unable to create a mailbox and a domain name in UTF-8, that doesn't really consider as level 1, right? Because level 1 cannot provide that, so it is not belong to level 1. So that means we have to think of a different level for that, which means level 2. So level 2 means you can do everything what you can in level 1, plus you can also create mailboxes and domain names. So if you go to a certain provider and you can create the mailboxes and you can create the domain names, and then send the emails and receive the emails, if it's all fine, then we say it's level 2 support. So that is why even if you remember that previous chart, some tools could have level 2 support. Some tools only could provide the level 1 support. That's the differentiation. Next slide. All right, so now next thing is actually when it comes to the email address internationalization, especially in relation to the configuration part, we need to understand a bit on the components that we have in a email communication, and also what sort of protocols that are involved in this whole process. Now, when you think of components, there are a number of components. Say, for example, we have a client, and we simply, in email terminologies, we call it as a mail user agent. And then mail user agent would basically, send the email, and then that goes to a mail submission agent. And then we have what we call a mail transfer agent. But generally, the mail submission agent and the mail transfer agent, they're all sort of, built into a single sort of, system as well. And then you have, depending on the mail service that this mail get traversed, you may see number of mail transfer agent in the path. And then, it would then finally go into a mail delivery agent, which would store the emails, and then, basically the client or the mail user agent in the receiver end can then download the mails from the mail delivery agent. So that's how the mails get transferred from one place to another place. Now, there are several protocols involved in this whole process. First of all, we have something called SMTP. Probably you might have heard about this quite a lot. So SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And this is the protocol that we use to communicate between mail transfer agent or the mail servers. Simply, we call those as mail servers, right? So the thing is that if you are to use those internationalized emails in local language scripts, then the SMTP servers or the SMTP protocol itself need to understand about this UTF-8, right, or the local language scripts. So this is why we say that if we are to do this, if we are to support the EAI-based emails, we have to make sure that the SMTP protocol is ready to support EAI, right? So that is quite important. Now, for this purpose, there is a certain signaling flag, and this signaling flag is actually called SMTP UTF-8. So that is to specify the support for EAI. Because when the mail servers talk to each other, when the two SMTP servers talk to each other, there is a certain signaling process happen between those two servers, right? So, for example, we have to make sure that the next hop server should support certain signals so that the sender can send those to the receiver or to the next hop. So we have to make sure that those acknowledgements has to come from the receiving mail server so that the sender knows that it can actually communicate with the next hop. So that's the whole idea. So now, if, say, in case, if one of those servers in the middle is unable to handle this, say a certain flag cannot be supported, say in this case, the SMTP UTF-8 cannot be supported by the next hop, then we will not be, or basically the sending SMTP server will not be able to send the email to the next hop. So that is where obviously that then the email has to be dropped, and then the receiver has to be notified with an error message or a report. So the whole idea here is that if we are to send an EAI email all the way from the sender to the receiver, all those SMTP servers in the middle has to support EAI. That is quite important. So in the whole path, all those mail servers, they should support EAI. So that is what we call, the successful delivery of the email. So that is in relation to SMTP. Now, with related to the delivery protocol, say, for example, earlier I was telling you about the mail delivery agents. So that is where, the client would download the emails from. So for that, we have protocols like POP or IMAP. And even these protocols has to be supported for EAI as well. So just like before, we have some certain signaling flags even for SMTP, even for IMAP and POP, that should enable the support for EAI. Now, in delivery agents, it is possible to do what we call a half support. That is possible. So what do you mean by half support? Say, for example, when the delivery agent store and then the client would come and get the email from the delivery agent, say, for example, if the delivery agent is unable to understand about all these local language scripts, then what it could do is it could downgrade this email to a different sort of, um, uh, different version, and then give that to the receiver. So when I say different version, that means it will not be able to interpret all those different characters in the email because it doesn't understand the signaling. So this is what we call downgrading or half support. Now, it is possible to do this, but it is not really recommended to do that, because the thing is that if the mail delivery agent is unable to process all that, then the client will not be able to really see the exact characters. It might display things like little boxes or things like that. So this is somewhat an issue. And so this is why, even though some half support is possible, even though the downgrading is possible, it is not really recommended to do that. Next slide. Okay, so as I was mentioning earlier, this is just an example to describe that whole process. To mention this SMTP UTF-8 example. So you can see in this whole part, we have a sender, we have a receiver, and then you can see all those different components that I was talking about: mail user agent, MUAs, MTAs, mail transfer agents. Now in this, for example purposes here, you can see there are 3 mail transfer agents, but sometimes in the real life, you might have less or you might have more, right? It all depends on the number of SMTP servers in the middle. Sometimes you may not need to have, say, in this example, you have 2 MTAs, but it may not be the real situation. But as I also told you, there are some certain acknowledgement messages, signaling happen between the sender and the receiver. So for the example purposes here, I'm taking, say, 2 mail servers, 2 MTAs. You can see there is S stands for sender, so that is the sending MTA, and the R MTA is basically the receiving MTA, the next hop, basically, right? So between these 2 servers, between this sender and the receiver, you can see below the communication or the signaling happens. So initially the sender will connect to, try to connect to the receiver or the next hop, basically. And then the receiver will have to respond with certain codes or what it can basically support. So in this case, you can see that it will say it can support SMTP, basically extended SMTP. And so typically when you see a code that starts from 2, that means it's a success. So it is okay, right? So it says in this case, there's a code 220, which means the receiver would say what is the receiving domain, right? And then there is what we call a hello message, or in this case, extended hello message. So the sender will send what's the sender's domain. And then there are also actually certain flags. Then the receiver will respond back saying what it can support. Say if the receiver can support things like attachments, like MIME and so on, it will reply back with a code for that. In the same way, in the same context, if the receiving MTA can support, say, the local language scripts like EAI emails, then it will respond back with this flag called SMTP UTF-8, right? So this is the key for this whole thing. So SMTP UTF-8 is the flag that we are talking about. So we have to make sure, in case if you are operating any mail servers, you have to make sure that your mail servers are able to understand this SMTP UTF-8 flag and then respond to those sending mail servers that it can support SMTP UTF-8, so that the sending mail servers can send the email to your mail servers. So that is the key. And after that, obviously, then the rest of the communication would happen. The sender will send the from field and what it can support with the email ID, and then that will be acknowledged by the receiver. and then the sender can start sending the data. And after all the data is sent, the email body is all sent, then the connection will be closed, and then that will be accepted by the receiver. So that's the usual protocol or usual communication signaling happens between the sender and the receiver. So this would happen all the way. I was only taking 2 servers here. If there are multiple servers in between all those servers, this whole process would happen. Next slide, please. All right, so that's the sort of kind of summary you can see here in this slide. Where those protocols are involved based on my previous explanation. There are SMTP protocol involved, then the POP and IMAP is also involved. So here the highlight, what you need to think is that all those email parties involved in the delivery part, they have to be updated to support the EAI. So there are several components here, several servers here. They all have to make sure that they support EAI. So again, this is what we are coming from. So if you're operating any of those servers, any of those components, make sure that your servers can support that EAI based protocol. And in case if any single SMTP server in the path, it does not support, then the email will not be delivered. Next slide, please. All right, there are a few additional considerations to consider here. Now, typically in our usual typical email, say the Latin-based English characters and so on, if we send an email to a, say, or if our email ID is in lowercase, or if we write the email ID in uppercase, it doesn't really matter. The email would get delivered, right? So the lowercase or uppercase doesn't really matter. But this is not automatically handled by EAI ready software. So in EAI, this doesn't happen, right? Just like what we do in normal emails. So this is something to note. Actually, this is not a big deal as well, because most of the local language scripts do not have this lowercase, uppercase concept. Yes, English or Latin-based characters have that, but then a lot of other local language scripts, especially in Asia Pacific, from point of view, a lot of scripts what we use in this region, we don't have this lowercase and uppercase matter, right? When it comes to say spam, spam is still typically in usual email communications we deal spam on different ways. We have various mechanisms like SPF, DKIM or DMARC and things like that to handle spam. So all those things still have to be, we still have to carry on all that, even with EAI emails. But only thing what you need to understand here is that because these EAI emails may contain different character sets, local language scripts in your email IDs and body and so on, sometimes the spam filters might consider this as a spam, and because depending on how the spam, what sort of criteria the spam filters are made of, then it might, if it sees some local language scripts in the body or in the subject line, it might still consider it as a spam. So this need to be handled. And also, again, if there are some developers here who are developing any spam filtering software, try to take this point as well and make this as a consideration in your development work. So in general, software services, they're all, not every client server software automatically doesn't support EAI. So we have to be aware of this whole thing. Next slide. Okay, now some considerations in terms of mailbox names. So when we say, for example, if you in your organization, if you are creating some mailbox names to your users, there are some considerations that you should think about. One thing is actually when you try to, if you are going to do some script mixing. Now, if you really don't have a reasons for that, you should not really be doing this. And so be careful of doing the script mixing, because that's not really recommended because of security issues. Now, it is always advisable to actually look for reference ID and tables, because in many of the local language scripts, we have this local, LGR language generation panels who has worked on reference ID and tables. So it is always good to look at these tables and see what are the valid scripts and strings, so that you know exactly what characters to use. So there is also actually, there's a specific tool we use called LGR toolset, LGR tool that can validate this mailbox strings. You can use this to test those. Also, as I told you earlier, especially if you're using some scripts like right to left scripts like Arabic and so on, make sure these scripts are also not really confusing. So avoid those script mixing. Next slide. It's always good to have some aliases and display name considerations. If you're using any local language scripts, always it's a good practice or advisable to create some ASCII-based email ID as well, because in case if there is some issue that cannot be delivered, then at least it can be delivered to the alias or the ASCII-based email. Also, if you're using some different signs and symbols, because normally when we use emails, we use so many different types of symbols, dots, underscores, hyphens, things like that. So before you use those, make sure that, especially in your local language scripts, if there are so many of those characters, think that whether it really makes sense to use those, and whether they are in proper context, and whether that doesn't create any security issues. I think that's all I wanted to convey, especially in terms of email IDs and dealing with your mail servers configurations and so on. These are some reference materials. If you visit uasg.tech, there are lots of white papers and then lots of reference material. Then I would encourage you to read those.
Thank you, Champika. And we can maybe take one question and then get back to the next last presentation from Dr. Data. So let me see if anybody wants to ask a question. If not, then let's continue. Dr. Data is the chair of Universal Acceptance Steering Group and managing director of Data Group of Industries. So over to you, Dr. Data. Thank you. We cannot hear you, Dr. Data. You may need to.
Thank you, Samad, and thank you, ICANN, Ethnic, and TWNIC to organize this UA session in this very important region. And UA is a very critical part of this new internet which is coming up. Next slide, please. We are going to talk a little bit about the impact of UA, what my friend Champika and Dennis have told you, and Sarmad has told a little bit of brief about it. How does it's going to impact and what it promises to the future of the internet. Next slide, please. So first thing is obviously the social relevance, how it is going to enter in everybody's life, how it is going to make a difference and offer a choice of a selection of new top level domain name, whether it is in a brand, whether it is in the skill or activity, whether it is the geography, or whether it is in your own script or a love for language. It doesn't matter, but you will have a choice. So once UA really gets accepted, the acceptability of those top level domain names which are seeing the life are going to be more better accepted and more better relevant in everybody's life. And of course, if we know all the countries are now accepting top level domain names in their own local scripts, and there are billions of people who are waiting to get online, and that is where the UA comes into picture. So this is the overall canvas of the relevance why UA is very, very important to obviously bring the experience or social economic power of the internet to the last user. Next slide, please. This slide tells you a very small thing, but a very impactful one. That is, people are waiting to come online, and there are millions. You can see this in slide worldwide. Every country has millions of users waiting to come online. And what is expected out of them is that they will come online if we can break the language barrier and if we can provide them the choice of accessing internet, and that's what is important. So we can't leave millions of people without the internet access and not providing the choice. That is the most powerful relevance to have UA enabled internet. Next slide, please. What it offers you, next slide. What it does is, obviously, not only it allows people to access internet, to provide the access to the last user, we need to enable the entire chain. And what is that chain? Chain is from the developers to the tool developers to the service providers. Everybody has to see this opportunity. That's a career opportunity. So will UA offer a new knowledge, new career opportunity, and a competitive advantage to a professional or to a company or to a service provider? All the answers are yes. If you are UA ready, if you understand UA, it's a new competitive differentiator for everyone, especially to the developers. Let me explain. If you are a developer, Java developer, and there are two people who are understanding Java, you can get a better selection opportunity if you are able to tell in your interview that you understand UA, you understand languages, you can make the applications which are worldwide accepted. It makes sense, and you are competitively advantaged at this position. So the opportunity is to start understanding that. What is the role for developing these applications? As I have told already in the previous slide, that this is a responsibility for all of us to even provide those applications which allow access to the internet in the language of the person's choice. Whether you are an IT system administrator, whether you are a owner of a company, whether you are a government, these skills are going to help bring in new people, new customers online. Next slide, please. So this is the promise of UA readiness. Next slide, please. So UA went ahead and did a research, and there is a research available. The report is available on uasg.tech website, which tells is $9.8 billion plus opportunity, which is conservative estimate according to us, and that's available to us to tap in. And that's a very small, you can say, tip on an iceberg. I think it's much bigger personally. And there is a whole world. You can imagine anything which has to be delivered to the whole world. It can't be in just less than 10 billion dollar. It has to be lot bigger. And that's what where everybody is getting impacted. You and me, whether the people who is using internet already or the people who do not access internet already, all are going to be impacted in this. This is the opportunity which is there for companies like us, companies like who are trying to build new solutions. So if you are trying to build a solution, if you are in a startup or a government or a company who's trying to build a software or trying to acquire a software, ask for UA ready software that will allow us to serve new range of customers, the customers who have never been served. It's a huge opportunity. An unconnected person will be connected very recently with the UA efforts, and these are going to be the new customers for you. If your application is not UA ready, you will not even know you have lost them, and the competitor will take away. So it's a very big opportunity for businesses to ensure that the UA readiness is there to allow people to come online and use your systems. Investments to upgrade systems is very low. This is a natural question which we get very regularly. How much it takes to upgrade my software? How much it takes to upgrade my systems? So I always say it's not something which you have to do overnight. Whenever you are upgrading your systems, you can just plan that UA readiness, and you will see within few months of time, or not more than a year, your systems will be UA ready. It's a matter of starting that practice in your company, and then you are able to serve the whole world. It doesn't matter which language, which script, which top level domain name, you'll be able to serve everybody. And that's what UA offers. Next slide, please. And in the past slide, one thing I would like to mention is the first mover advantage. The first mover advantage is that if whole world will do it in few years, idea is who takes the first step and become the leader. So it's an opportunity for all of you in this region to take the first step and show to the world that you are ready. Universal acceptance steering group accept applications and the cases, and we make these case studies globally available for people to see this. And on this line, this is one case study in front of you. That is Rajasthan government. The Rajasthan government, Rajasthan is a state in India, and the government is run by Chief Minister. Approximately 70 million people live in this state. This state has taken a leadership position to provide free email address in the native language, that is Hindi, to the citizens by a government. So if you are a government or if you are a private company, you may think about your this kind of effort in your own region, in your own state. Very powerful thing, large impacts. And two impacts, let me tell you, is those people who never accessed internet before, never accessed email at least before, are now able to have an internet or email of their own choice in their own language. They are more trustworthy email addresses because they can read what email address is, and the government is able to send them communication at completely free, because emails doesn't obviously cost you to send to anybody. Emails are getting sent to millions of people by government completely free, and this is the communication, this is the return on investment. So when you have the large consumer base available, so imagine that you have a new stream of advertising or dissemination of information to the millions of people in your region. This is what this government has done, and this is available right now. Even if somebody wants in Rajasthan state, you have to be a Rajasthan citizen to have that. It's completely free. You need not to go to any government office or anywhere, and you can just deploy and have an email address for lifetime. This is not for few months, and unlimited storage. So this entire thing is by government of Rajasthan. Very powerful project, and UASG went ahead and provided a thoughtful leadership award to the Chief Minister of Rajasthan for this, doing this. It was a path-breaking leadership initiative by them. Next slide, please. I think we are done. Thank you very much for providing opportunity for universal acceptance. Over to you, Sarma. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Data. Thank you, all the panelists. And let's also open again for questions. If there are any questions, please either share in the chat or speak up. Thank you.
Hi, Sharma. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead, Yoshiro.
Hi, this is Yoshiro Yodea from Japan. Thank you for this opportunity to talk with you. I'd like to ask two things regarding to your work. First is about the IDNA 2008. I think that if you say IDNA conformant, then it explicitly denote that it is conformant with IDNA 2008, because IDNA 2003 and IDNA 2008 is different, very different. And IDNA 2003 is duplicated by IDNA 2008, so that the software or framework or CMS, something like that, are conformant with IDNA 2003. It have to be eliminated as a conformant software. That is one comment or question to you. And the second one is about the using internationalized identifiers for the encryption or signaling. So in the certificate, internationalization of the identifier are already standardized as an RFC 8398 and 8399. So the conformant with that encryption or certificate standardization is also the scope of this universal acceptance work, because the real identifier is used as a used with PGP, OpenPGP, or SMI, so that the conformant with RFC 93, 90, 83, 98, 93, oh, I'm sorry, 8399 are very important for the real universal acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshiro. So both are very good comments. I would maybe open this up to the panel. Would anybody want to make I'm not sure, those are not quite questions, but if anybody would like to comment on the 2 points Yoshiro made, one on the IDNA 2008 compliance versus IDNA 2003, and the other one is around certificates for email addresses.
This is Dennis Armand. I think I can take at least the first one. And it's a very good point, Yoshiro, about the difference and the important, the difference between the two protocols, right? One being preceded by the other. And so if you want, and this is the information, for example, the slide that we're looking at here, doesn't speak in detail as to, you know, what IDNA protocol is conformance to the library. But if you look at the actual report, there you'll find more detail as far as the definitions, terminology, and the actual conformance, or which protocol is each library is conformance to. So I would encourage you to look at uasg.tech and look for the report UASG 018A, and that's where you'll find more information and detail about the study. And about your comment about certificates, yes, I think we agree that you know, all applications that in some shape or form use identifiers, they need to be looked at. So I think we take note of that, and we'll look at it at the proper time.
Thank you. Champika, anybody else want to comment on the points raised by Yoshiro?
Just to add what Dennis said, I think he sums up very well. But just to benefit of the audience more, that to have an SSL over an ID and domain name is not an issue today. You can definitely have an SSL over IDN with the PUNI code, which is very much possible. And of course, you can't have an directly on the script right now, which is sometime it's an issue. But running an SSL site on an IDN is very much possible. And I think we can take this as a note that we may write a blog around it as a universal acceptance group to have more clarity around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Data. That's a good suggestion. Would anybody else like to make a comment? If not, are there any other questions from the floor?
This is Yoshiro. Can I repeat my point?
Yes.
So the conformance with IDNA 2003 is, I believe, level C or level 0. It is not conformant with IDNA. So that I'd like you, to distinguish the conformance with IDNA 2003 is not conformant with IDNA. So that I think if you have chance to update your report, then I'd like to update the conformance level for the IDNA 2003 is out of conformant, like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshiro. We will certainly go back and take another look. But I think when we're talking about support for universal acceptance, it's looking at, you know, it is certainly, as Dennis pointed out, looking at IDNA 2003 versus IDNA 2008 support, but there are some other considerations, of course, in the process, which, for example, requiring normalization, and some other steps, which may be needed. So if you, we will, we'll encourage you to take a look at the report. We will also take your input and take a look at these reports. But generally speaking, when we are talking about IDNA support, we are actually talking about conformance with IDNA 2008. And if something is only conformed with IDNA 2003, it is pointed out as such, and obviously clarified that it does not support IDNA 2008. But again, thank you for your input, and we'll go back and make sure that, as far as these documents are concerned, we can clarify that further. Any other questions? Any last comments from any of the panelists?
So let me have last comment as the chair of Universal Acceptance Steering Group. Let me take this opportunity to invite all of you to become part of Universal Acceptance Steering Group. And you can become part of us by simply visiting a website, uasg.tech. And if you want to subscribe, you can just add subscribe to uasg.tech/subscribe, and you will become part of our mailing list to get an update. Thank you for putting this slide. There is a slide where you can also join us on the social media to keep a track on what's going on here. We request everybody to participate. It's a very important topic. India region, we would like more and more people to be there. There is an opportunity for becoming ambassador of universal acceptance and doing a lot more through local initiatives. So there is a lot of activities. Just get signed up and keep a track on what's going on and contribute in this mega mission we all are in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Data. I would like to thank all the panelists for their presentation, and also to all the attendees for listening in and for the questions. Thank you all for attending the session, and we can now close the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.